Welcome to a Designated Drinker Show limited series, the Do-Gooders Social Hour. Now, we're changing things up just a bit in order to bring center stage to a few folks who are bringing goodness to the world. Now tell me, how could we not toast to that? And to accompany you on this journey into doing good, we recommend crafting yourself an oh-so-refreshing La Mandarina. The combination of the tequila smoothness and the tangy sweetness of the tangerines are sure to delight. It will definitely make you long to have sand between your toes, salt in your hair, and more of this cocktail in your glass. And to find the recipe, all you need to do is scroll down into the episode notes. And of course, you know you'll always be able to find it on designateddrinker.show. And don't worry, we'll be right here waiting for you. So again, welcome back to part 2 of our conversation with the founder and CEO of Red Rabbit, Rhys Powell. So Rhys, in part 1, you shared a bit about growing up in the Bahamas and your journey into entrepreneurship and what inspired Red Rabbit. So just in case our listeners missed it, please give them that little elevator pitch so exactly to remind them what Red Rabbit is.
Absolutely. Red Rabbit is one of the country's premier Black-owned school food management companies. We uplift Black and brown children in schools by providing them with nutritious and healthy and culturally relevant meals in the school cafeteria. We've been around for almost 20 years, and we serve kids in urban environments in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and soon Ward 7 and 8 in DC.
I might even want to go back to school. What's your approach to the menus then? What makes you different from everyone else?
Our menu process is one of the more unique aspects of what we do. Most organizations in our industry start with requirements for a menu, how many grams of XYZ ingredient, and then they build a menu that way. We start the other way around. We start by asking the children what they eat when they're celebrating. We usually have focus groups with the communities we serve off the bat, and we'll ask kids, what are your favorite meals? What do your parents or grandparents or caretakers cook for you? When you have a holiday or an event, what's served on the table? And that usually sparks a vibrant conversation between the children and the chef. And the chef then takes that feedback, and usually our chefs are from these same communities too, so there's a little familiarity there. And then from that, the chef will start to create a menu. And that kind of perspective infuses the menu with the celebration and joy. You're literally taking one of the most joyous times in kids' lives and building menus from those experiences.
When you said focus group, I thought for sure he's going to talk about the parents, but it's the kids. That's awesome. Because parents would like, no, I want them to eat only broccoli. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. So what are some examples of the recipes that are in various schools? What does that look like?
Sure. I'll tell you a couple of dishes that are standouts that we've had over the years. Recently, not even recently, a few years ago, we added Jollof Rice to the menu, and this is a traditional African dish. It was introduced by a chef who grew up in Brooklyn. She has a West African father and a Caribbean mother. And
that had to be a fun household.
We asked her what dish would have made you feel whole when you were a child in school. She grew up in the public school system in Brooklyn, and that is the dish she came up with. And so it was new for us, and she put it on the menu, and she served it with suya chicken, which is also from her heritage. And it was one of the most popular dishes that we've served at the time and that we continue to serve. But most interestingly, it inspired all of our other chefs to start looking into their heritage and kind of ask themselves that same question and figure out what they would want to put on the menu. Another great dish is pastelón, which is which is a traditional Puerto Rican and Dominican dish. On the Northeast, in the neighborhoods we serve, we have a lot of Latino children, and this is a dish that they brought into our menu. It is a labor of love. It is made with plantains that you have to boil for 2 days. Yeah. You layer the plantains with savory meat. And if you've never had it, I recommend you find it as soon as you can. But this is another dish where when we made it for the first time, our executive team walked to a school to get a serving of it. And it has been extremely popular across all of our schools, but particularly our kids who have Latino descent and heritage are very connected to it. And, it represents for them a taste of something that they typically don't find in school, which is a taste of.
Just thinking back, I didn't know what that. You had to tell me what it was. I've been to Puerto Rico. But even being introduced to Puerto Rican food as an adult, there were so many things I didn't know, and to think that you could be exposed to that at such a young age, I mean, it's just a natural barrier breaker. I mean, not only are you uniting children to their own foods, but you're introducing other children to food that's culturally significant to other. I mean, that has to. I can't imagine that doesn't break down barriers, even in the slightest way.
It really does, and I'm glad you mentioned that. And I'm going to say cross-cultural, but we could unpack that a little bit. The cross-cultural dynamics that happen when you really provide a meal that connects to a child's heritage, and then they're able to share that with their friends that they're in school with who aren't from that heritage. We have seen that often. We get to see it often. The chefs get to see it all the time. But it really represents, to me, the best of what our society is this very pluralistic, multicultural society that we live in. And when that conversation starts to happen with kids in this very intimate, safe environment, and they're able to share themselves as their whole selves with love, joy, and celebration to other children in the same environment who aren't from the same culture. I mean, you're looking at the roots of what makes America, America. Not to get too philosophical.
No, but it is. I mean, absolutely. I can remember when I was a kid, I came from a mixed family. My mother always said my mother had blonde hair and blue eyes, and obviously my father did not. So when I would go to school, I didn't want a quesadilla in my lunchbox because I grew up in an all-white neighborhood in the middle of the United States. It wasn't diverse at all. And it was shame almost because I was different. And you want to be the same. But here you're flipping that on its head and celebrating the differences and introducing children to those differences in like you say, in such a joyous way. You have to be breaking. I can't imagine that doesn't, it has to be breaking down barriers. I don't know if you can prove it, but I mean, we'd be fools not to believe it.
We all know it instinctually, and you could prove it otherwise too. The othering and the shaming, a beautiful word you brought up. One of my inspirations was, culinary inspirations was David Chang. In his book, he talks about it. He grew up in this neighborhood, actually, in northern DC, and he talks about othering that he grew up with. And he mentions very vulnerably that it still affects him today, even as he's a very successful celebrity chef, the idea that his culture isn't centered, and he has to step outside of himself in order to be good or great or excellent. And he's been very transparent about the work that he's had to do to bring himself back to center as a whole human being. And I think what he gives me and what he gives our organization is a little bit more validation that this work is actually helping beyond just the nutritive qualities of the meals. We're giving kids a space where not only are they not being othered, but the whole concept of othering is being dismantled, and the idea that someone who's different from you somehow could be less than, or another culture could be less than, isn't something that's a part of the narrative. In fact, quite the opposite. The difference is something to be celebrated.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just somebody who grew up in like a complete opposite of anything in New York and a little bit longer than Tooth. But I mean, it was a completely different space. I can't believe that is gone in many places within the United States still, unfortunately. So I, again, applaud you for all that you're doing, because it's got to make a lot of difference for a lot of children, and which makes for a better for tomorrow for the rest of us too. So thank you. So in DC, when you look at the areas, how will you'll obviously start these focus groups with these kids, right? How do you, in the neighborhoods that are diverse, but not so maybe culturally centered, like in New York, like I there's like areas that are just, very deep pockets of certain cultures that are kind of easy to put your finger, put a circle around, say this is what we're going to touch on. How do you approach that where it's a little more diverse or a little not quite so central food? Yeah, it's culturally centered. That's where I'm trying. Sorry, my words are somewhere in my pocket. I'll keep looking, Rhys, I promise.
We really want to go to communities that have been historically underserved, and for a couple of reasons. I'll elucidate on a few of them. In school food, free and reduced price meals is a measure typically of poverty in a neighborhood, the percentage of free and reduced price meals of children in the school. And so first off, we look for high percentages of free and reduced price meals as a marker for there's need in the school, but also inside this community, that the infrastructure and the investment from society hasn't been there. And so this is something that we're drawn to. In the urban environments up and down the East Coast and Mid-Atlantic, we've been able to identify that in those neighborhoods, we find primarily Black and brown children in those neighborhoods. So those communities are primarily Black and brown. And there's a history behind that. There's a history here in DC, history in New York, in Philadelphia, in Newark, New Jersey, around why those neighborhoods are the ones that are underinvested and why Black and brown communities are centered in those neighborhoods. But that's the second reason and what we find when we go into those neighborhoods. And then the third one is we're looking for places where there are schools and community members that are deeply rooted. So the type of school where there are folks from those communities who've created these institutions, and usually they've been there for long periods of time, 20, 30 years, working to uplift those communities. And then we go into the communities, we take audit of who is in the community. So what are the heritages and the backgrounds of the children in those communities? And while overall New York City is a very diverse, it does have those pockets where, as you find communities, you'll find predominantly Black communities or predominantly Latino communities, predominantly Southeast Asian communities. And while there is some overlap, we tend to find a homogeneity even within these small centers inside of the cities. And that's been consistent up and down the East Coast again, and the Mid-Atlantic in these urban environments. And so our decision is that we're going to go in there and we're going to start celebrating the cultures that we meet. So instead of looking at it from almost a charitable perspective, we're going to look at it from an insider's perspective, because these communities to us inside our organization are us, and we are of and from those communities also. This is myself and members inside our organization. And so when we go in there, we see the rich history and the rich tapestry and the rich heritage of those communities, of the people that make up the communities, and food becomes an indelible part of that culture and of that narrative. And then it starts to be, when you approach the work from that perspective, it starts to become very easy to see beautiful food. I think food has a unique place inside our lives and inside our society, where independent of the socioeconomic dynamics that are happening, we all can appreciate and love and break bread over good food.
Yes.
And so we as an organization kind of put blinders on some of the other aspects of the socioeconomic dynamic. We hone in on the food and the quality and the heritage and the beauty that's in the food. And then we uplift that around the community that we're serving. There's the cross-cultural aspect, but there's also that just centeredness of the children that we serve.
That's awesome. Now I just want to quit now. Let's get rid of Missing Link. Let's go take care of kids. No, I'm kidding. I'd be the worst at it. Again, I'd be like, can't they all just drink whiskey and be fine? No. I'm just kidding. So Rhys, you talked about a few other things with me, and I really want to understand how you measure impact and what's coming up. What's next? You've done all these great things, and you brilliant man. I'm sure you've got like a billion other red rabbits running around in your head, figuring out what's next.
One of the more recent developments within our organization, and something that not only aligns with our impact, but also talks about where we're going, is the concept of school cafeterias as neighborhood restaurants. When we have the orientation that we have that...
Are you just trying to get these kids to tip you? No. Sorry.
When we have the orientation that we have that the children and the heritage and their well-being, not just their nutritive well-being, but their sense of themselves, is the goal of our organization, it led us inextricably to taking ownership of the space in addition to the food. And this makes sense when you think about restaurants just generally in society. How a restaurant feels is almost as important as how good the food is.
Absolutely.
When you go to the restaurant.
Yeah.
And restaurateurs spend a lot of time and energy in designing their decorum in order to give you a certain experience. We do this in our homes too. We don't just serve food. We create a space that's loving and uplifting and representative of who we are, to break bread and to eat our dinners. And so we do the same thing at Red Rabbit. We design the cafeterias to feel like neighborhood restaurants. And this takes the form of primarily a little bit of interior design. So we add color, we add texture to the space. We are dismissing the drab cafeterias that a lot of us grew up with.
I was just thinking of the painted concrete, brick concrete walls.
None of that. You're talking about joyous spaces with color and texture. We imbue the spaces with a sense of culture, and that's usually we pull artists from the community and we put their paintings on the wall, or we put their pieces around the space.
That's awesome.
We'll bring cookbooks from chefs that are either from that community or who have heritage that's similar to that community, and we'll put them inside the space. And on that, there's something so exciting when you see kids flip through a chef's cookbook, a notable celebrity chef, and point to dishes and say, my mom makes that, my dad makes that, and kind of have this immediate connection, but putting the cookbooks in the space. And then we also add little elements that speak to the community. So we'll have plantains and yuca in a space, and limes, which kind of talk to Latino heritage, or we'll have condiments. Maybe if we're serving a Southeast Asian, we'll have condiments that represent that culture, and kids love condiments too, so that helps.
Sriracha.
Lots of sriracha, lots of Tabasco. And you know, that energy there where children are walking into a space and they are feeling as though, even though I'm inside of this school, this could be a family member's home. This could be a restaurant around the corner from me. This is where I come to relax from the day before I go back. And I go back into my classroom. I go back to doing my sports activities. And that's where we kind of start to see our impact and our metric come in. So the school is talking to us about what that does for their community. The teachers are walking into this space and they're saying, hey, this is cool. I like being here, as opposed to lots of times where teachers don't eat with the kids because they have a choice and they're opting not to eat.
No, they always had the teacher's room. That was always the mystical place. You're like, what goes on in there?
With some of our chefs, though, our teachers are lining up to eat the food. It's a completely different dynamic, but the teachers will come into the space. And so, you know, I have a story about one school that I'll interject here. This is a school in the South Bronx. We have a lot of South Bronx schools, and they serve primarily English language learners. And before we started, the school has 400 students and only 16 ate lunch every day. So you can imagine what that environment is like, where only 16 of the 400 kids eat the school-provided lunch.
Wow.
After we went into the school and completely converted the cafeteria and changed the menu and gave them a beautiful chef, the amount of children eating went up to about 360 out of 400.
Wow.
And the head of the school, and the teachers ate too, and the head of the school came to me and she said, you know, this has changed our entire school culture. This has brought us together in a way that they had no idea that the school cafeteria could do that for them.
Yeah.
And so that dynamic there, where we are becoming a part of the culture of the school, where we are changing how children and teachers and educators and administrators feel in their space, that's how we measure our impact. That is, and it's hard to create a metric around it, but you know when you walk into a space where there's that community and there's that joyousness. And this concept of making school cafeterias like neighborhood restaurants, that is our future. That's where we're heading. And for all of the schools we serve, we hope that's something that we can do for them.
Wow, just not the tray full of slop. The lunch lady with her little hairnet on. I had a lunch lady, though. I remember her. We called her Mrs. R. I have no idea what her name was, but it was always Mrs. R. And she was as sweet as she came. It was terrible food, but she was as sweet as they come. And I'm sure if you had given Mrs. R the opportunity to work in such a space, I'm sure she would have found even more joy. The woman had just joy about her. You know, you have those people that you meet that she was just always very happy. I could only imagine she probably would have just exploded. Little baby red rabbits would have flown out of her if she had that kind of place to go to call work.
That was me. I spent a lot of time as a lunch lady, and I loved it. I mean, it's a joyous job. It's the one time in the day where kids don't have an adult telling them what to do. Oh. And you're an adult who's literally just there to serve them. And it is an interesting dynamic that you have, but it's one that we take a lot of pride in and we kind of really enjoy.
Well, obviously, if everyone could see, you have a big smile on your face when you start talking about it. So it's great. It's awesome. Well, yep, Alex has given me the stink eye again. So is there last thing you'd like to leave our listeners with? Is there one thing that you would want them to leave with? Just that one little nugget of tasty deliciousness? Look, I set it up. Bad dad jokes all around.
You know, I think if there's something that I want folks to walk away from this with, it's that this goes back to very early on, before we had the shape that we have now, and before this conversation had the narrative that it has now, and it was that we shouldn't underestimate children. I think in the beginning, or even years ago, when we talked about providing healthier food for kids, there can be a perspective that children can only eat square pizza. They only want pizza and nuggets and French fries. And there's nothing wrong with pizza, nuggets, and French fries. My kids eat pizza, nuggets, and French fries, and they do like them. But kids really are so much more than that, and they are always impressing and surprising us. And when you serve them food with dignity and quality and love, they not only enjoy it and eat it, they kind of need it.
Yeah.
You know, and
don't we all?
Don't we all?
Yeah.
Exactly. Don't we all? And you know, as a parent, and for parents out there that understand that dynamic, when you've given your children something that not only they enjoy, but it's something they need, and you see them come alive, and you feel very rooted in your parenting, in your work as a parent, and you start to understand what it means to be responsible for children. I think if we can have that orientation towards how we educate and how we feed children in our institutions, I think we would do ourselves a great service, and we would do them a great service.
Yeah, slightly selfish. Better tomorrow for all of us. So thank you for that, Rhys. Thank you for those amazing words all the way through, but especially at the end. And thank you for all that you do. And I mean, I can't imagine doing it, but you are one hell of a lunch lady.
Thank you.
Cheers. The Designated Drinker Show is produced by Missing Link, a Latino-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, we craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Also in the Missing Link lineup of podcasts is Roger That, a podcast dedicated to guiding you through the haze of dementia, led by skilled caregivers. Now, if you're looking for a whole new way to enjoy the theater, check out Between Acts, an immersive audio theater podcast experience. Each episode takes you on a spellbinding journey through the works of newfound playwrights, from dramas to comedies and everything in between. Find Missing Link's League of Podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And while you're there, please don't forget to follow, download, and review the shows. Your reviews help our shows reach new audiences. To find out more about Missing Link, visit missinglink.company. That's missinglink.company.